For more than 2 decades, two of the most advanced fighter jets ever conceived have circled each other in silence, never meeting in combat, never facing off in the skies they were designed to dominate. The American F-22 Raptor and the Russian Su-57 represent not just rival aircraft, but rival philosophies of air power, secrecy, and technological ambition. They were built for a war that never came, shaped by assumptions about enemies that never fully materialized. This is not a story of dogfights or victories. It is a story of anticipation of how nations prepare for conflicts they hope to avoid, and how technology evolves in the shadows of geopolitical tension. The F-22 emerged from the final years of the Cold War, optimized for total air dominance. The Su-57 was born in a different world, one defined by budget constraints, asymmetric strategy, and changing ideas of what air combat really means. To understand why these aircraft matter today, we have to trace their origins, their breakthroughs, their limitations, and their legacy. Because even without a single direct encounter, this stealth war has already reshaped modern air combat. Long before stealth fighters existed, air combat was shaped by a single brutal truth: whoever saw the enemy first usually survived. From the earliest days of aerial warfare in World War I, fighter design revolved around speed, altitude, and firepower. Pilots relied on eyesight, instinct, and eventually radar, but visibility remained the decisive factor. As detection improved, so did the weapons designed to exploit it. By the mid-20th century, air combat was no longer just about maneuvering. It was about information. The introduction of radar during World War II marked a turning point. Aircraft were no longer invisible beyond the horizon. They were measurable, trackable, and increasingly vulnerable. As radar networks expanded during the Cold War, fighter jets became faster and higher flying, attempting to outrun or outclimb threats rather than hide from them. But speed alone could not outrun physics. Missile technology advanced faster than aircraft performance, shrinking reaction times and turning airspace into a lethal, data-driven environment. This imbalance created a new strategic problem. If detection was inevitable, how could aircraft survive in heavily defended airspace? The answer did not come from engines or weapons, but from mathematics. In the 1960s, researchers studying radar cross-sections discovered that the shape of an object mattered as much as its size. Certain angles reflected radar energy away from the source, instead of back toward it. The implication was radical. An aircraft could be designed not to outrun radar, but to confuse it. Early experiments were crude and deeply impractical. Faceted shapes reduced radar returns, but destroyed aerodynamic efficiency. Computers powerful enough to model these interactions barely existed. Even when the theory worked on paper, translating it into a flyable aircraft seemed unrealistic. Most air forces dismissed the idea as a technical curiosity rather than a viable solution. Speed, altitude, and electronic jamming still dominated doctrine, yet the strategic environment kept pushing designers toward invisibility. By the 1970s, surface-to-air missile systems had grown deadly accurate. Airspace over major targets became layered with radar, missiles, and interceptors. The cost of losing pilots and aircraft skyrocketed. In this environment, even marginal reductions in detectability became valuable. Experimental programs quietly began exploring low observable technologies, not to create dogfighters, but to enable penetration. The first real proof came not from fighters, but from strike aircraft. Stealth was initially about survival, not dominance. Aircraft like the early low observable demonstrators showed that radar evasion was possible if designers accepted severe trade-offs. These aircraft were unstable, limited, and dependent on computers to stay airborne, but they changed the conversation. Stealth was no longer theoretical, it was operational. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union approached the problem differently. Soviet air defense networks were among the densest in the world, built to protect against Western bombers and cruise missiles. This focus shaped their aircraft philosophy. Rather than eliminating radar visibility entirely, Soviet designers emphasized speed, altitude, and electronic countermeasures. Stealth was studied, but it competed with industrial constraints and different strategic priorities. By the late Cold War, two paths were emerging. One sought near invisibility at the cost of complexity and expense. The other aimed for survivability through performance, numbers, and adaptability. Neither side yet envisioned a stealth air superiority fighter, but the seeds were planted. the idea that air dominance could be achieved before the enemy even knew. It would soon redefine everything. The turning point came when stealth stopped being an experiment and became a requirement. In the United States, this shift was driven by a stark realization in the late Cold War. Future air battles would not be won by speed alone. Soviet radar, missiles, and interceptors had matured into an integrated system capable of contesting the skies from takeoff to target. If air superiority was to be guaranteed, American fighters would need to operate where detection itself was uncertain. That realization crystallized into the Advanced Tactical Fighter Program, an effort to replace the aging F-15 with something fundamentally different. The goal was not incremental improvement. It was dominance through invisibility, situational awareness, and first-shot lethality. Two competing teams emerged. One was led by Content Reference OASITE, Zero Index, Zero, working through its legendary Content Reference OASITE, 1 Index equals 1. The other was led by Northrop. Both faced the same challenge: create a stealth aircraft that could also outfight anything in the air. The breakthrough was not a single invention, but a convergence of technologies. Radar-absorbent materials reduced reflections. Carefully aligned surfaces scattered radar energy away from emitters. Internal weapons bays eliminated exposed hardware. Most critically, digital flight control systems allowed designers to abandon traditional aerodynamic stability. The resulting shapes were efficient for stealth, not for natural flight, and computers filled the gap. Lockheed's prototype, the YF-22, demonstrated this synthesis in 1990. It could supercruise fly supersonically without afterburners while remaining difficult to detect. It fused radar, electronic support measures, and data links into a unified picture for the pilot. The aircraft was not just hard to see, it was designed to see first, decide first, and fire first. When the YF-22 won the competition, the F-22 Raptor became the world's first true stealth air superiority fighter. Across the former Soviet Union, a parallel but very different process was unfolding. The collapse of the USSR shattered funding, supply chains, and institutional certainty, yet the need for a next-generation fighter remained. Russian planners understood that stealth could no longer be ignored, but they also recognized they could not simply mirror the American approach. Their solution would need to balance low observability with agility, range, and affordability. That effort eventually took shape as the PAC-FA program, led by Content Reference OASITE, 2 Index equals 2. Unlike the F-22, the emerging Su-57 was conceived in a multipolar world. It aimed to blend reduced radar signature with extreme maneuverability, advanced infrared sensors, and flexible weapons options. Stealth was important, but it was not absolute. Russian designers accepted higher detectability in exchange for aerodynamic performance and adaptability. The technical hurdles were immense. Russian industry struggled with composite manufacturing, engine development, and avionics integration. Early prototypes relied on interim engines. Software lagged behind hardware. Progress was slower, uneven, and often public. But the conceptual leap had been made. Russia was no longer chasing fourth-generation fighters. It was attempting to redefine what fifth generation meant on its own terms. By the early 2000s, both paths were set. The United States had a flying embodiment of stealth-first dominance. Russia had a prototype that challenged the definition of stealth itself. The stealth war had moved from theory to metal, and the world was watching. The end of the Cold War did not slow the rise of fifth-generation fighters. Instead, it reshaped their purpose. What had begun as preparation for a superpower clash evolved into a long-term strategy for controlling the skies in an uncertain multipolar world. From the 1990s onward, the development paths of the F-22 Raptor and the Su-57 diverged sharply, not just in technology, but in tempo, doctrine, and political context. The F-22's ascent began quietly. After the YF-22 won the Advanced Tactical Fighter competition in 1991, the program entered full-scale development under Content Reference OASITE, 0 Index equals 0, with major contributions from Boeing and Pratt & Whitney. The aircraft was shaped by lessons learned from earlier stealth platforms, but it went far beyond them. This was not a specialized strike aircraft like the F-117. It was designed to dominate contested airspace, destroy enemy fighters, suppress defenses, and survive against the most advanced threats imaginable. Throughout the 1990s, development focused on refining stealth while preserving performance. Radar-absorbent coatings were improved for durability. Sensor fusion matured into a defining feature, allowing pilots to receive a single, coherent tactical picture rather than juggling separate radar and electronic displays. The F-22's and APG-77 radar introduced low probability of intercept modes, allowing it to search and track without revealing its presence. Supercruise capability reduced reliance on afterburners, cutting infrared signature and extending range. The first production F-22 flew in 1997, and by 2005 the aircraft reached initial operational capability with the U.S. Air Force. On paper, it was unmatched. In exercises, it demonstrated kill ratios that bordered on the unbelievable. Pilots routinely engaged and destroyed opponents without being detected. In beyond visual range combat, the Raptor's advantage was overwhelming. Even in close combat, thrust vectoring and high energy retention made it formidable. Yet the program faced mounting pressure. The geopolitical environment had changed. The Soviet Union was gone, and with it the justification for large fleets of air superiority fighters. The F-22 was expensive to build, and even more expensive to maintain. Its stealth coatings required meticulous care. Its avionics were cutting-edge but complex. As defense priorities shifted toward counterinsurgency and expeditionary warfare, critics questioned whether such an aircraft was still necessary. By 2009, the decision was made to cap production at 187 operational aircraft. The line closed in 2011. The F-22 became a paradox. The most capable fighter ever built, produced in numbers too small to export or replace. Its very dominance made it politically vulnerable. No enemy could challenge it directly, but neither could allies afford it. Nor could the US justify expanding the fleet without a peer adversary. While the F-22 was entering service, Russia's path was far less linear. The PAK-FA program officially began in the early 2000s, but progress was slowed by economic recovery, industrial constraints, and shifting requirements. The first prototype, designated T-50, flew in 2010. From the outset, it signaled a different philosophy. The airframe emphasized blended wing-body design, internal weapons bays, and reduced frontal radar cross-section, but without the extreme shaping seen on American stealth aircraft. Instead, Russian engineers focused on agility and sensor diversity. The Su-57 was designed to operate in environments where stealth might be compromised. It incorporated multiple radars operating on different frequencies, including side-looking arrays. Infrared search and track systems played a central role, reflecting Russian confidence in passive detection methods. Thrust vectoring engines promised exceptional maneuverability, particularly in close-range engagements. The 2010s became a decade of iteration rather than deployment. Prototypes tested avionics, flight control software, and weapons integration. Engine development proved especially challenging. The Su-57 was initially flown with interim power plants derived from older designs, limiting performance and fuel efficiency. The long-delayed I-30 engine promised improved thrust, reduced fuel consumption, and lower infrared signature, but it remained in testing for years. Political events further shaped the program. Sanctions restricted access to certain materials and technologies. Budget priorities competed with other defense needs. Production rates remained low. Unlike the F-22, which entered service as a mature system, the Su-57 evolved in public view. Each milestone, first flight, first weapons test, first deployment announcement was closely scrutinized, sometimes skeptically, by outside analysts. Meanwhile, the global context continued to shift. The emergence of China's J-20 altered the strategic balance, underscoring that fifth-generation fighters were no longer exclusive. Air combat doctrine began to emphasize networks over platforms. Data links, satellites, and unmanned systems became force multipliers. The F-22, despite its age, remained a cornerstone of American air dominance, upgraded incrementally with improved software, sensors, and interoperability. The Su-57 entered limited service in the late 2010s, but in numbers far smaller than initially planned. Its operational role remained ambiguous. It was marketed as a multi-role platform capable of air superiority, strike, and electronic warfare, but its true strengths were still being defined. Unlike the F-22, it was designed with export in mind, reflecting Russia's need to sustain production through foreign partnerships. Throughout this period, rival concepts emerged and faded. Some nations pursued cheaper fourth-generation upgrades as alternatives to stealth. Others invested heavily in unmanned combat systems, yet no credible substitute for fifth-generation air superiority fully materialized. Stealth fighters remained expensive, complex, and politically sensitive, but also uniquely capable. By the early 2020s, the ascent phase had clarified the contrast. The F-22 stood as a refined, specialized instrument of dominance, frozen in production but unmatched in capability. The Su-57 represented adaptability under constraint, less stealthy on paper, but flexible in concept and still evolving. Both aircraft reflected the strategic realities of their creators. They had never met in combat. They had never tested their limits against each other, but through exercises, deployments, and constant refinement, they shaped how air forces around the world thought about power, deterrence, and the future of the skies. The true revolution of fifth-generation fighters did not arrive with a single dogfight or decisive battle. It arrived quietly through doctrine, procurement choices, and the way air power began to influence political decision-making. The tipping point was not combat, but confidence. For the first time since the dawn of the jet age, air forces began planning around the assumption that one side could see, target, and strike without being meaningfully challenged in return. In the United States, the F-22 reshaped how air dominance was understood. Its presence allowed planners to assume control of contested airspace from the opening hours of a conflict. Exercises demonstrated that traditional fourth-generation fighters, even when numerically superior, struggled to survive against a stealth-first opponent. This shifted investment away from sheer numbers and toward quality, integration, and information dominance. Air superiority was no longer just about winning engagements. It was about preventing them from ever occurring. This change rippled outward. Allies who could not access the F-22 due to its export ban adjusted their strategies around interoperability with American stealth assets. Air campaigns were designed with the assumption that stealth platforms would suppress enemy fighters and defenses, enabling follow-on forces to operate with reduced risk. The idea of layered air power, with stealth aircraft at the core, became standard planning doctrine across NATO. Russia's experience produced a different kind of shift. The Su-57 emerged in an environment where absolute air dominance was neither affordable nor assured. Instead of anchoring doctrine around a single dominant platform, Russian planners emphasized flexibility. The Su-57 was intended to operate as part of a broader system integrated with ground-based air defenses, electronic warfare assets, and long-range missiles. Stealth was treated as one variable among many, not the defining feature. This divergence reflected deeper societal and economic realities. In the United States, sustained defense budgets allowed for exquisite, high-cost platforms optimized for specific missions. In Russia, constraints encouraged multi-purpose designs capable of adapting to changing roles. The result was not just two different aircraft, but two different philosophies of warfare, one centered on preemptive control, the other on layered denial. Beyond military institutions, fifth-generation fighters influenced public perception of power. The F-22 became a symbol of technological supremacy, often cited in political debates as proof of American military advantage. Its rarity and secrecy only amplified its mystique. The Su-57, meanwhile, became a symbol of resilience and ambition, proof that Russia remained a major aerospace power despite economic and political pressure. The broader societal shift was subtle but profound. Air power returned to the center of strategic deterrence. The ability to control airspace without visible escalation changed how conflicts were signaled and managed. Stealth fighters did not just promise victory in war, they promised leverage in peace. Their mere presence influenced calculations long before shots were fired. By the mid-2010s, the revolution was complete. Fifth-generation fighters were no longer experimental or exceptional. They were the benchmark against which future systems would be judged. Even nations that could not field them directly shaped their defenses and strategies around their existence. Air combat had entered a new era, defined less by visible confrontation and more by invisible advantage. In the last 2 decades, the story of the F-22 and the Su-57 has been less about dramatic leaps and more about quiet refinement. Both aircraft entered a phase where software mattered as much as metal, and integration mattered more than raw performance. Fifth-generation fighters became nodes in a larger system rather than isolated weapons. For the F-22, this era has been defined by sustainment and modernization without expansion. With production closed, the U.S. Air Force focused on keeping a small fleet relevant in a rapidly evolving battlespace. Incremental upgrades improved sensor fusion, electronic warfare resilience, and data sharing with other platforms. The Raptor's role shifted subtly from a lone apex predator to a force multiplier that opens airspace for joint and coalition operations. One of the most significant changes has been connectivity. Early F-22s were designed in an era before ubiquitous networking. Over time, upgrades improved interoperability with newer platforms, including other stealth aircraft and command and control systems. This allowed the F-22Q weapons for other aircraft, shared targeting data, and operate as part of a distributed kill chain. Its value increasingly lay in what it enabled, not just what it destroyed. At the same time, limitations became more visible. The fleet's small size constrained availability. Maintenance demands remained high. The aircraft's original design prioritized air-to-air dominance, leaving strike capabilities comparatively narrow. These factors fueled debates about cost-effectiveness and accelerated plans for a next-generation successor rather than a major redesign. The Su-57's contemporary phase has looked very different. Rather than stabilizing into a fixed configuration, it has continued to evolve. Low-rate production allowed Russian engineers to incorporate lessons from testing and limited operational use. Avionics, sensors, and electronic warfare systems were refined incrementally. The long-awaited next-generation engine moved closer to operational readiness, promising improved performance and efficiency. Operationally, the Su-57 has been positioned as a multi-role asset capable of air combat, strike missions, and coordination with unmanned systems. Russian doctrine increasingly emphasizes manned-in-manned teaming, with the Su-57 acting as a command node for drones conducting reconnaissance or strike tasks. This reflects a broader shift toward distributed operations designed to complicate enemy targeting and reduce risk to pilots. Export considerations have also shaped the Su-57's trajectory. Unlike the F-22, it was never intended to remain exclusive. Marketing efforts highlighted adaptability and cost relative to Western counterparts. While export success has been limited, the emphasis influenced design choices, reinforcing versatility over specialization. Globally, the presence of these aircraft has reshaped strategic calculations even without large-scale deployment. Potential adversaries plan around the assumption that stealth fighters may be present. Air defense systems have been adapted to counter low observable targets through multiband radars and networked sensors. In response, stealth aircraft have leaned more heavily on electronic warfare, cyber integration, and cooperative tactics. Ethical and strategic questions have also emerged. Stealth reduces warning time, compressing decision cycles and increasing the risk of miscalculation. The opacity of capabilities complicates arms control and transparency. As fifth-generation fighters operate closer to contested borders, their presence can signal deterrence or provoke escalation without a single shot fired. Today, the F-22 remains a benchmark of air superiority, even as its role narrows and its replacement is planned. The Su-57 remains a work in progress, gradually expanding its capabilities and refining its purpose. Both exist in a world where dominance is less about individual platforms and more about systems of The stealth war continues not in combat, but in constant adaptation. To understand the legacy of the F-22 Raptor and the Su-57, it helps to look at what air combat was before they existed and what it became after. Before fifth-generation fighters, dominance in the air was contested, temporary, and costly. Pilots expected to be detected. Losses were assumed. Control of airspace was something to be fought for repeatedly, mission by mission. After stealth air superiority fighters entered service, that assumption quietly changed. The F-22 redefined what air dominance meant. It proved that an aircraft could enter contested airspace, destroy enemy fighters, and leave without ever being meaningfully challenged. Detection was no longer guaranteed. Engagements could be decided before opponents knew they were under threat. This shifted air combat from reactive maneuvering to proactive control. The most important phase of a fight became the one the enemy never realized had begun. That change permanently altered doctrine, training, procurement, and strategy across the world, adapted to the expectation that future conflicts would begin under stealth conditions. Air defenses evolved, not to defeat enemy fighters in combat, but to find them at all. The emphasis moved toward networks, sensors, and information fusion and arms race of awareness rather than speed. The Su-57's legacy is different, but no less significant. It challenged the idea that fifth-generation design had only one valid path. By blending reduced observability with extreme maneuverability, sensor diversity, and multi-role flexibility, it argued that survivability could come from adaptability as much as invisibility. Its development reflected the realities of constrained resources and changing warfare, where no single attribute could guarantee dominance. Together, these aircraft inspired what came next. They accelerated the shift toward sixth-generation concept systems, designed not as standalone fighters, but as command nodes for drones, sensors, and long-range weapons. They forced engineers to think beyond airframes and engines, toward software, autonomy, and integration across domains. Perhaps their most lasting impact is psychological. The knowledge that an unseen aircraft may already be present has altered how airspace is perceived. Deterrence now operates in silence. Power is signaled not by mass formations or visible patrols, but by absence, by what cannot be seen, tracked, or challenged. The stealth war between the F-22 and the Su-57 never happened in combat, but its influence is everywhere. In doctrine, in design, and in the assumptions that govern modern warfare. Their legacy is already written across the sky. The next chapter of air dominance is already taking shape, and it looks markedly different from the rivalry that produced the F-22 and the Su-57. The future is less about a single, decisive aircraft and more about ecosystems of capability where manned fighters, unmanned systems, sensors, and networks operate as one. In the United States, planning has shifted toward a successor concept often described as a family of systems. Programs like Content Reference OASITE, 0 INDEX = 0, are designed to move beyond the limitations of even the most advanced fifth-generation fighters. Rather than maximizing stealth in one airframe, the focus is on adaptability, rapid software upgrades, modular payloads, and seamless integration with autonomous wingmen. Stealth remains important, but it is now paired with electronic warfare, cyber resilience, and long-range weapons designed to operate in heavily contested environments. Russia's trajectory points in a similar direction, though shaped by different constraints. The Su-57 is expected to serve as a bridge rather than an endpoint, coordinating drones, extending sensor reach, and launching standoff weapons from safer distances. Incremental upgrades, particularly in engines and avionics, will likely continue, but the emphasis is shifting toward manned, teaming, and cost-effective force multiplication rather than absolute dominance by a single platform. Across the globe, air forces are preparing for a battle space where detection is fleeting and decision cycles are compressed to 2 seconds. Artificial intelligence is increasingly central, assisting pilots with threat prioritization, sensor management, and mission planning. Hypersonic weapons and advanced air defenses further complicate the picture, reducing the margin for error. In this environment, survivability may depend less on invisibility and more on coordination and speed of decision-making. There are open questions with no clear answers. Can stealth remain effective as sensor technology diversifies? Will unmanned systems eventually replace manned fighters at the front edge of combat? Does concentrating so much capability into networked systems create new vulnerabilities? These uncertainties are shaping debate within defense circles and among policymakers. What is clear is that the stealth war between the F-22 and the Su-57 was not an ending, but a beginning. It set the rules of a new era, one where power is measured not just by what an aircraft can do, but by how well it connects, adapts, and endures. The skies of the future will not be ruled by a single fighter, but by the systems that think, sense, and act faster than their rivals. The story of the F-22 Raptor and the Su-57 is not one of battles fought, but of futures imagined, born from different eras, economies, and philosophies. These aircraft reveal how nations prepare for conflict by trying to prevent it. One pursued near invisibility and absolute air dominance. The other sought balanced stealth, blended with adaptability and resilience. Neither was ever tested against the other in war, yet both reshaped how air power is designed, deployed, and understood, their legacy lives in doctrine, in deterrence, and in the assumptions that now govern the sky. Air combat is no longer defined by what is seen, but by what is denied, by who controls information, timing, and awareness before the first shot is ever fired. The stealth war that never happened still changed everything. If you found this deep dive valuable, like the video, it with others who love aviation and military history. Comment your thoughts on which philosophy you find more convincing, and subscribe for more high-end documentaries like this one, because sometimes the most important wars are the ones that never begin.